The morning Freddie Mercury opened the newspaper and saw his secret sold for £32,000. London, 1987. Morning light filtered through the windows of Garden Lodge. Freddie Mercury sat alone in his dressing room, still in his silk robe, reaching for the morning newspaper the way he did every day. Tea steaming beside him. The room quiet. Then he saw the headline. His hand froze. The newspaper trembled. His private life, his health fears, his relationships, his secrets. All of it, printed for millions to read. Sold by the man who'd slept in his guest room, the man who'd filtered his phone calls for years, the man he'd trusted with everything. Paul Prenter had taken 30 pieces of silver, £32,000, and destroyed what was left of Freddie's privacy. But the real story isn't about money. It's about how the person holding the keys to your heart can lock you in a prison you don't even see being built. Freddie didn't scream, didn't throw the teacup against the wall, just sat there, reading, line after line of intimate details only someone close could know. His voice, usually so commanding it could move 70,000 people with a gesture, came out as a whisper. How could he? Just 3 words. But everyone who heard them said they'd never heard Freddie sound like that. Broken, betrayed, small. This is the story of how Freddie Mercury, the man who seemed invincible on stage, learned that fame's most dangerous enemy isn't the critic or the rival band. It's the person you let inside when the lights go down, the one who sees you without the costume, the one you trust with the truth, and the one who decides that truth is worth more sold than kept. Paul Prenter didn't start as a villain. That's important to understand. He started as an assistant, someone hired to manage logistics, handle scheduling, filter the chaos that surrounded a global superstar in the early 1980s. And at first, he seemed perfect for the job. Efficient, loyal, protective of Freddie's time and energy. The band members noticed him but didn't think much about it initially. Just another person in the growing entourage that surrounded Queen as they became one of the biggest acts on the planet. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, Prenter's role evolved. From assistant to gatekeeper. From gatekeeper to filter. From filter to wall. He began controlling who could reach Freddie, which calls got through, which friends were bothering him, which family members were draining his energy, and Freddie, exhausted from touring and creating and performing and being Freddie Mercury every waking moment, was grateful. Someone was handling things. Someone was protecting him from the demands. Someone understood how tired he was. What Freddie didn't see was the isolation being constructed, brick by brick, call by call. Prenter positioned himself as the only person who truly understood the pressure Freddie faced. The only one who got it. Everyone else? They wanted something. The band wanted more albums. The label wanted more tours. Friends wanted access. Family wanted time. But Paul just wanted to help. At least that's what he said. And Freddie, who was fundamentally kind despite the theatrical persona, believed him, trusted him, let him build the walls higher. By the mid-1980s, something had shifted inside Queen's dynamic. Brian May felt it first. The phone calls that didn't get returned. The rehearsals Freddie showed up late to or missed entirely, something that had never happened in 15 years of working together. The creative sessions that felt guarded instead of open. Roger Taylor noticed the atmosphere change. The studio that had always crackled with energy and arguments and laughter now felt cold, controlled, like there was a stranger in the room even when it was just the 4 of them. Except it wasn't just the 4 of them anymore. Prenter was always there, in the corner, listening, filtering, whispering. One afternoon in Munich, during a particularly tense recording session, Brian tried to break through. "Freddie, we need to talk about direction," he said, looking at his friend with genuine concern. "We're losing the heart of what makes us Queen, the connection between us." Freddie sat at the piano, didn't look up. His fingers rested on the keys but didn't play. He looked tired, eyes shadowed by late nights and darker company. Before he could respond, Prenter's voice cut through from the corner. "He's exhausted, Brian. He doesn't need lectures today." Arms crossed, defensive, positioned between Freddie and his own bandmate. "Maybe he's outgrown this. Maybe you're the ones who need to catch up." The room went cold, and then Brian and Roger exchanged looks. John Deacon, always quiet, looked down. They realized in that moment they weren't just losing their lead singer to solo projects or creative differences. They were losing their brother to someone who was poisoning the well, convincing Freddie that the people who'd built Queen with him were somehow holding him back. The isolation deepened. Prenter controlled access with increasing strictness. Old friends found themselves unable to reach Freddie. Phone calls went unreturned. Invitations were declined on Freddie's behalf without Freddie knowing they'd been extended. The inner circle shrank and shrank until it was essentially just Freddie and Paul and whoever Paul deemed acceptable. And all the while, Prenter was watching, listening, collecting every private conversation, every vulnerable moment, every secret Freddie shared in confidence, every fear about his health as strange symptoms began appearing, every detail about his personal life that the public didn't know. Prenter was building a file, not to protect Freddie, to profit from him. But nobody knew that yet, not even Freddie, who still believed Paul was loyal, who still thought the walls being built around him were for protection, not imprisonment, who still trusted the man who slept in his guest room and controlled his calendar and filtered his world. The person Freddie thought was guarding the door was actually locking it from the outside. And the real shock, the moment that would shatter Freddie's ability to trust, was still coming. It arrived on a morning in 1987 with the rustle of newspaper pages and headlines that shouldn't exist. The tabloid had paid well. £32,000, not a fortune by rock star standards, but enough to make Paul Prenter sit down with a journalist and unload everything. Every secret Freddie had shared, every private struggle, every hidden relationship, every fear about illness that was just beginning to show symptoms, details about Freddie's lifestyle that he'd kept carefully private in an era when being openly gay could destroy careers and invite hatred. Information about his health concerns at a time when AIDS was still poorly understood and heavily stigmatized. Personal moments that should have died in the confidence of friendship, but instead became headlines for millions to consume over breakfast. Prenter sold it all. Packaged Freddie's vulnerability as product. Traded intimacy for cash. Betrayed trust for the price of a decent car. When Freddie saw that newspaper, something broke that never fully healed. The details in the article could only have come from someone who'd been inside. Someone who'd heard private conversations. Someone Freddie had trusted completely. There was no question who the source was. Only one person had access to all of it. The betrayal was total. Complete. The man who'd positioned himself as Freddie's protector had actually been his exploiter all along, gathering material, waiting for the price to be right, then selling Freddie's humanity to the highest bidder. Imagine that moment. You're Freddie Mercury. You've built a persona to survive in an industry that didn't make space for people like you. You've carefully controlled what the world sees, allowing yourself to be vulnerable only with a trusted few. And then you discover that one of those few has taken your vulnerability and sold it. Published your fears, exposed your secrets, made your private pain public entertainment. The violation wasn't just professional, it was intimate, personal. The kind of betrayal that changes how you see the world and everyone in it. Freddie's response was immediate. Prenter was fired, severed completely from Queen's organization, erased from the payroll, banned from Garden Lodge, cut out of Freddie's life as thoroughly as someone can be removed. But the damage was permanent. The newspaper couldn't be unprinted. The secrets couldn't be unshared. The trust couldn't be unbroken. And Freddie couldn't unknow that the person he'd relied on had been documenting his vulnerabilities for profit. Brian May later said that Freddie changed after the Prenter betrayal, became more guarded, more careful about who got close. The flamboyant performer who seemed to trust everyone now trusted almost no one. The inner circle, already small, shrank further. Mary Austin, who'd been in his life since 1970 and never wavered. Jim Hutton, who loved Freddie, not Freddie Mercury, and proved it through actions, not words. Maybe one or two others who demonstrated loyalty over decades. Everyone else was kept at arm's length. The man who'd commanded Wembley Stadium with openness and joy now moved through life behind walls he couldn't afford to drop. The psychological impact was profound. Freddie had always understood that fame came with lack of privacy, that being a public figure meant accepting public scrutiny, but this was different. This was private conversations made public, personal struggles weaponized, vulnerability sold. It taught Freddie that intimacy was dangerous, that sharing himself with others was giving them ammunition they might use against him, that the cost of letting someone see the real Farouk instead of the performed Freddie was potentially having that reality sold for £32,000. People who knew Freddie in the years after Prenter's betrayal talked about a shift. The warmth was still there, but filtered through caution. The generosity remained, but protected by boundaries. He still created music that was emotionally open. The Show Must Go On, written when he was dying, contains some of his most vulnerable lyrics. But in personal relationships, the easy trust was gone. The assumption that people meant well was replaced by vigilance. The belief that loyalty was default was shattered by the knowledge that some people view closeness as opportunity for exploitation. The irony is devastating. Freddie Mercury, who gave everything to his audiences, who shared his voice and his passion and his artistry with millions, couldn't share his private self without risk. The man who seemed like he had everything, fame, wealth, talent, adoration, couldn't have the basic human need for trustworthy intimacy. Because the person he'd trusted most had proven that access to Freddie's real self was a commodity to be sold when the price was right. Roger Taylor later reflected on how the Prenter situation affected the whole band. "We'd tried to warn him," Roger said in interviews. "We could see what was happening. The isolation, the control. But when you tell someone that the person they trust is manipulating them, it sounds like you're the one being manipulative." Freddie thought we were jealous or controlling. He didn't see the prison being built until he was already locked inside. Brian added that watching Freddie realize he'd been betrayed was one of the most painful experiences of their friendship. "You could see something die in his eyes," Brian said. "Not the performance. That continued. But the part of Freddie that believed people were fundamentally good, that trusted easily, that opened up without fear. That part died when he read that newspaper." The aftermath extended beyond Freddie's psychological state. The information Prenter sold made Freddie's private health concerns public. At a time when AIDS was killing thousands, and society's response was often cruelty rather than compassion. The exposure of his personal life invited judgment from people who'd never had to navigate being gay in an industry and era that punished visibility. The betrayal compounded the isolation that illness was already creating. Freddie was dealing with a disease that was terminal and stigmatized, and now he was dealing with it while knowing that someone he trusted had sold his vulnerability to strangers. In Freddie's final years, the circle around him was tiny and fiercely protective. Jim Hutton, Mary Austin, a handful of others who'd proven themselves over decades. People who loved Freddie enough to protect him from a world that had proven it couldn't be trusted. The flamboyant performances continued almost until the end. Freddie shot music videos when he could barely stand, recorded vocals when he could barely breathe. But off stage, he retreated into a privacy that was no longer choice but necessity. The world had shown him that openness was dangerous, that vulnerability was ammunition, that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Paul Prenter didn't prosper from his betrayal. The £32,000 was spent. His reputation in the industry was destroyed. Nobody wanted to work with someone who'd sell secrets for cash. He died in 1991, just months before Freddie, also from AIDS-related illness. Some saw irony in that, both men dealing with the same disease. One surrounded by people who loved him despite everything. The other alone, having traded loyalty for money and discovered that money couldn't buy back what betrayal cost. Freddie never spoke publicly about Prenter after the firing. Didn't give interviews about the betrayal. Didn't write songs explicitly about it, though many believed The Show Must Go On contains echoes of that pain. The lyric about facing the truth despite wanting to turn away. The acknowledgement that life hurts but continues anyway. The determination to keep performing even when everything inside is broken. Whether or not it was specifically about Prenter, it captured what Freddie learned from the betrayal. That the show must go on even when the person you trusted has sold your secrets and shattered your ability to trust anyone new. The story of Paul Prenter and Freddie Mercury is ultimately about the price of fame and the cost of trust. Freddie had everything fame could offer except the thing humans need most: genuine connection without fear of exploitation. He learned that being the most famous person in the world doesn't protect you from betrayal, that success doesn't buy you loyalty, that the person sleeping in your guest room might be cataloging your vulnerabilities for profit, and that once trust is sold for £32,000, it can't be bought back at any price. When Freddie died on November 24th, 1991, the world mourned a legend, but the people in that tiny final circle mourned a man who'd learned to trust again after betrayal nearly destroyed him, who'd let a few people back in despite knowing the risk, who'd given his final years to creating art even when his body was failing and his trust in humanity had been shattered by someone who claimed to care. The Prenter betrayal didn't end Freddie's life, but it ended his ability to live openly. The man who performed for billions died surrounded by maybe 5 people he could truly trust. That's the real cost of what Paul Prenter sold. Not information, trust, not secrets, the ability to share them safely, not £32,000 worth of headlines. The destruction of Freddie Mercury's faith that people close to him would protect rather than exploit his humanity. The lesson is brutal and clear. Fame doesn't protect you from betrayal. Success doesn't guarantee loyalty. And sometimes the person guarding your door is actually building your prison. Freddie Mercury learned that lesson in the worst possible way. By trusting someone who viewed that trust as inventory. By opening up to someone who cataloged vulnerability as product. By believing that loyalty was default only to discover that for some people, everything has a price. Even friendship, even trust, even the private struggles of a dying man. That morning in 1987, when Freddie opened the newspaper and saw his secrets sold, something irreplaceable was destroyed. Not his career. That continued. Not his talent. That remained until his final breath. But his ability to believe that intimacy was safe. That people could be trusted with the real Farouk underneath the Freddie Mercury performance. That opening up wouldn't result in being sold. Paul Prenter took £32,000 and walked away. Freddie Mercury took the lesson and carried it to his grave. Some betrayals are too deep to heal. Some walls, once built, can't be torn down. And some trust, once sold, can never be rebuilt. That's the story nobody tells about Freddie Mercury's final years. Not just that he was dying from illness, but that he was living with betrayal, and that sometimes the second wound is deeper than the first.